Modules. Let's talk about modules. So what is a module? When do you want to use it and why? Most importantly, why do you want to use modules? So if you remember in the past, I said the whole point of doing Python is to automate things as much as possible. Now, if we're copying and pasting code around, that's not really automating things, is it? We're still doing a little bit of manual work by copying and pasting code around, and it can get a little bit confusing where you have your code saved and how to find it again. And that's where modules come in handy. So what is a module, first of all? Okay, so we've already been using modules. So if I do maya.cmds as cmds, and then let's just use random as an example as well. So this should look kind of familiar. We've been typing this maya.cmds as cmds line the whole time, and this is just the Maya module, the cmds module within Maya that we have access to, so that we can use all the commands. And if you remember, we also used the import random module, and the random module is built into Python, and it gives us access to a lot of cool functions to do, like randomization and stuff like that. And you can access this random function from anywhere that has Python. Anywhere that has access to Python most likely has access to random. And Maya.cmds is only accessible within Maya, and it's only really useful within Maya because all the commands inside of this Maya.cmds module kind of affect things in your scene. So you can do things in your scene and and cool stuff like that. But it's not really that handy outside of Maya because you don't really have a scene to be affecting, and you don't have objects to affect. And I'm going to show you guys how to write your own module, but within inside of Maya. So it's only like something that you can access within Maya as well. It doesn't really make sense to write modules for outside of Maya. So I'm not going to go into that because this whole series, the whole point is just to do Python within Maya. So let me show you this little function here. And before, if you remember, I showed you guys how to write functions, but I haven't really shown you guys how to save functions. And so in order to reuse a function, you'll just be copying and pasting it, which isn't really that effective. It's not really that good. You should be able to save your function somewhere and access it again. So I've got this little function here, which takes one object and it takes another object, and then it snaps one object to another. So if I just move this cube that I have in my scene and I scale it up like this, I can then select this torus, and then if I run the script, you can see it snaps the torus to the cube. That's pretty cool. And I can also do it in reverse, of course. I can just move the torus, rotate it kind of like this, and then scale it. And now I can grab my cube and run the code, and you can see it's snapped the cube to the torus. And that's pretty much all this little function does. It's only like a few lines. It's nothing crazy. I'm grabbing my selection, and then I'm just calling this snap to function. Now I want to jump over to this other scene, and I've got another function here which does something completely different. But if I show you guys what it's going to do, what's going on in my scene, I've just got a cube, nothing special, and I've got a sphere here, and I've kind of just subdivided the sphere a bit so it's got some more detail. Now if I grab my cube first, and then I grab my sphere, and then I run this code, you can see what it's done is it's taken this sphere and it's shrink wrapped it onto this cube. If I move this cube around, you can see it's doing some pretty wacky stuff. Kind of pretty interesting, but that's pretty much what this code does. I called it cling wrap. So it's just taking one object and it's shrink wrapping it to another. And that's great. I can delete history, I can move it around, and you can see now I've got this like interesting kind of shaped cube. And that's kind of interesting, and I'm sure it has its uses. But for now, let's just undo until I get back. So yep, back to the beginning, nice and fresh, reset. But here's the problem with this code, this cling wrap code. If I move this cube here, and then I select this sphere and I run it, you can see it's doing something weird. It's not really working. And that's because the cube is way over here and the sphere is way over here. It can't really shrink wrap onto the cube when it's so far apart. But if I move this sphere a little bit closer, you can see now it's doing the right thing. And as soon as I move it away, it's doing the wrong thing again. So really what I want is, I want to move this sphere so that it's on top of the cube before I do the shrink wrap. Now, how do we do that? Well, we've already written this little code that takes one object and then it snaps it to another. You can see like that. So I just want to take this little piece of code and I want to combine it with this piece of code so that it's doing the snap first. So it's snapping this object to there, and then it's doing the shrink wrap. So the crap way to do it, the wrong way, I would argue, is to just copy this code. I mean, it's not really wrong, but it's just not as nice. You know, one way to do it is just copy and paste this code into here. And then I can use this snap to function here, snap to, and then put my source object and my destination object. And then now if I run this code like this, should work, and there we go. It's snapped it first and then it's done a shrink wrap, so it's worked this time. Now this way isn't the nicest way to do it because you're copying and pasting this function around. What I would say is the nicer way to do it, and probably the better way to do it, is to start to think about your code as a library of code. So you have functions that you can access whenever you need to, that you've written in the past, and you can access it whenever you need in order to do exactly this, in order to like add it onto this piece of code. So now I want to create a module to store this snap2 function that I've written so that I can access it whenever I need to for whatever reason. You know, if I'm writing new code and I want to use this little snap2 function, I can actually just access that module. I mean, that's what a module is at the end of the day. It's just a library of code. And it's helpful to start thinking of your code as, you know, little libraries of code that you can access whenever you need to. So I'm going to cut that little snap2 function. So it's cut now, and I want to just come over to my file browser and then just locate my Maya preferences directory. So I'm on Linux, so things are going to look a little bit different if you're not on Linux and you're on a different operating system, or maybe you're on a different distribution of Linux. But really, all you need to do is come to your Maya preferences directory, and the process is going to be the same on all the different operating systems. And then inside of that directory, just find the version of Maya that you're using. I'm using 2020, so I'm going to come into the 2020 folder. And then inside the 2020 folder is going to be a scripts directory. I'm just going to come into this scripts directory. And now I'm going to create a new text file. And then call this text file, let's just call this snap library. So maybe I want to create a little library where I have all my different kind of snapping functions inside of. So I can do all kinds of cool snapping things inside of them. And of course you can name it whatever you want. You know, you can just name it library if you intend to make a bigger, more generic library. I'm just going to call this snap library, you know, for this example. And then, you know, if you create a text file, the default format is .txt. So if you create a text file inside of Windows or Mac OS, you know, chances are it's going to add this .txt extension there, and that's fine. I can show you guys how to change it to a Python format later on. But really, you know, for now, tech.txt is fine. So now if I double click on that, it's going to open it up in whatever notepad application you have. You just want to paste that little snap2 function inside here. And then I'm going to hit save. Really, that's all I need to do for now. I mean, we'll have to do another step, but I want to show you guys, you know, what happens when we don't do that step first. So now I've got this snap file with my function in there. I can just rename this to .py. Now this is an actual, you know, Python compatible file. It's like it's a module already, and that Python can read. All we needed to do is rename it to .py. Pretty handy. I mean, that's all Python scripts are at the end of the day. It's just a text file. So now I want to import my library that I've just saved, and you can do that very similar to import my.cmds. I'm just going to do import library, and I can run this, and you can see nothing's really happened, but now this Python interpreter has saved this snap library into memory. So we have access to all the commands in there. So I can take a look in this using the dir function. So if I run dir on it, you can see the result's going to be this kind of weird, like this weird list, and inside there's going to be a bunch of double underscore, strings. You can ignore them for now. What I really care about is this snap_to. You can see we've added the snap_to function in there, and Python's recognized it and said, okay, there's this snap_to function in there. And we can actually access this snap_to function by just doing very similar to my.cmds. We can just do .snap_to, and then now I can run this function. So let me just undo till before we did the shrink wrap. And you can see now, say for example, I wanted to snap this cube or snap this sphere maybe to this cube. I can select this cube first, select this sphere, and then I need to store my selection. So I'm just doing this as an example, and then I want to snap my first selection to my second selection. And run, you can see it's errored out. So why the hell has it errored out? You can see here it says global name CMDS is not defined. But what do you mean? We've got CMDS right here. I'm running this code. Why is it still erroring out? Well, now if you remember, I said we needed to do one extra step when we saved. So I'm just going to come back to my my file browser, to the scripts directory, and that extra step is inside this .py file. So I'm going to open it in my text editor again. Inside this .py file, we also actually need to import maya.cmds as cmds. Now this way, this script inside here knows to access maya.cmds in order to use these cmds functions. So it's a little thing that, it's a little gotcha that if you don't know what you're doing, it can really stump you. But yeah, just make sure you're adding whatever functions that you're using. If you're accessing any modules inside of these functions, just make sure you import them as well inside of this module. So now I can close this guy, and you can see that it's created this .pyc file here, which is kind of interesting. This wasn't there before. What this is if I open this in a text editor, so open this up in my notepad as well, you can see it's kind of got this garbled text in there. You don't really need to worry about what this is. What Python's doing is it's taking this code and it's kind of compiling it as machine code. And then it's, instead of referencing this code here, it's referencing this machine code so that it's a little bit more efficient when it runs. Okay, that's all it's doing. But this is kind of going to present a problem as well. So we've already added the import statement into our module. But now if I run this code, you can see it's still complaining. Like, why is it still complaining? We've updated our code, but it's still complaining. Well, that's because it's already stored into memory. You can see it's already stored this snap library code into the Python memory, and it's already gonna reference whatever function is inside of memory. It's going to reference the snap_to function and the snap_to library that's already in memory. And if you recall, when we first imported it, it didn't have this import my.cmds statement inside of our little module. So it's just referencing that same version of the module that didn't have the my.cmds line. So to fix that, we need to just reload this module. So I can come down here and just type reload snap library. Now if I run this code, it's going to generate a new version of this .pyc file. And then it's going to use this new version in memory instead. So now I can run this code again, and you can see it's worked. It's not complaining anymore. So that reload function is really handy for if you make some changes to your code and you need to use it straight away, you can reload first. And reload's a little bit dangerous. It can cause some issues, especially if you're using classes, but we haven't really gotten into classes just yet, and it should be safe to use reload on very simple modules, very simple scripts. And that's just like a little bit of a disclaimer. If you're using reload everywhere, just be wary that it can cause some issues, and it's the kind of issues that you really don't know what the hell's going on. But yeah, that's basically it. Now we've got this snap library that we have, and we've got our little snap function in there. Instead of just typing snap2 here and copying and pasting our code, what we can do is just do snap library dot snap2. And if I move my sphere back over here and I grab this cube and grab this guy now and I run this code, you can see that it's snapping it first and then doing the shrink wrap. And we have this little import statement here to thank. We don't have to copy and paste this snap2 code. And if I wanted to use it in another piece of code, of course I can just do the same thing. If I write like a new piece of code, I can just import this snap library and I have access to the snap function whenever I need to. And that's really it. That's basics of modules. I would recommend that if you write some cool functions, that you save it somewhere inside of a module that you can access again for next time, and save yourself having to copy and paste code. Get a little bit more organized. Yeah, that was pretty much it with modules. There's nothing crazy about them. And I highly recommend you guys use modules and use it early on so that you guys can train yourselves to think about your code as a library. Start thinking bigger picture. How do I save my code and reuse it in other areas and make my code as reusable as possible? So rather than writing giant long functions, how do I write smaller functions that do a single thing, and I can just reuse that function elsewhere, kind of like we did in this lesson. Yeah. Stick around.